Hello, Larry Lessig. Thank you so much for this interview. You just participated yesterday to the first broadcasting of the last documentary from Flore Vasseur, which is about democracy. And it was a meeting between you and Edward Snowden in Moscow. Could you talk us about this meeting and this documentary? What did it change for you?
Well, so the meeting was between Edward Snowden, me, and Birgitta Jonsdottir, who is the founder of the Pirate Party in Iceland. The idea of the meeting was to have a conversation at a really critical moment. You know, we had just elected Donald Trump. The day of our conversation was when the Electoral College voted to make him our president, to talk about, what the future of democracy could look like. And I had been an admirer of Snowden from the moment I heard about Snowden, but I didn't quite understand exactly how justified that admiration was until I met him. And I think the really striking thing about Flore's film is the way it demonstrates just how deep and reflective a person Snowden is. Julian Assange is, in my view, completely undisciplined and careless in his advocacy and efforts towards transparency and reckless, really reckless. And I believe he was a tool of the Russians and partly what brought us to Donald Trump. And Snowden is the opposite. It was clear that he was very careful in his thinking about his whistleblowing and how he did the whistleblowing. That was very careful. But this film really shows how it's not just about technology or security or surveillance that he is a sophisticated thinker. It's much broader than that.
What is the main idea you get thanks to this discussion with him? If you have maybe only one thing to get.
Well, I have two things. So the one thing that I think is really important that comes out of his views in that discussion is to recognize the way in which the conversation has been narrowed to exclude the most important issues. And so the most important issues are the issues crazy people talk about, and the unimportant issues are the issues that you're allowed to talk about. That's a really important idea that I think is true. The second really important idea is the obligation all of us have to do something, right? So, the victory won't be won by the equivalent of Martin Luther King. It's not going to be great central figures who rally the world to. Victory is going to be won by 10,000 Martin Luther Kings at a very local level, people who are willing to do whatever, but do something, and to have the courage to do something. And he was really focused, and it was interesting to watch because, of course, you think about the sacrifice he made, and that was a huge one. But he was really focused on getting people to recognize the kind of pedestrian sacrifice, the common sacrifice that we all should be making. And I think that's a really critical insight, how to produce that.
Okay, thank you. And so during this meeting, as you said, you were also with the girl who founded the Pirate Party in Iceland. What could you tell us about the Iceland experience?
So Iceland, after the crisis in 2008, started a process to crowdsource a new constitution. I mean, Iceland doesn't have an authentically Icelandic constitution. The Danes gave them a constitution which was basically the constitution of Denmark, and then they changed the king to a president. So it's basically this hack. And so part of the view of many people after the crisis was that part of the reason for the crisis was the corruption that was enabled by that constitution. So they started a process to crowdsource a new constitution. They began it by having 1,000 people randomly selected to identify the values for this new constitution. They then had an election where more than 500 people ran to be on a constitutional commission. 25 were elected. They spent 4 months drafting a constitution. Now, the Americans spent 4 months drafting our constitution, but the difference is the Americans didn't post their drafts to Facebook, but the Icelanders did. And so over the course of these 4 months, you had comments from people around the world about this constitution. They produced this really beautiful constitution, short and powerful in its thinking and, some rough edges, but I think it's really an amazing document. Then they had a referendum. The referendum asked whether Parliament should enact a new constitution based on this draft, and more than 2/3 of the people said they should. And then Parliament said, no, we're not going to do it. So there's been the struggle since that happens to get the Parliament to actually do it. And this election was a really sadly tragic moment when, there's a bunch of parties that had rallied together to say, if we're elected, this is what we will do. We will enact a new constitution based on that draft. And Birgitte was in the lead of that movement, but they didn't get the votes, and so it didn't happen.
Yes, it's for this time it didn't work, but we can hope the next will be the good one. Thank you very, very much, Larry.
Thank you for